I never thought I'd be here, writing this, but here I am. A lot of people might read this and think I'm a monster, but I think if I don't get it out, it's just going to eat me up. So here goes. It all started about 6 months ago. I had no intention of doing anything wrong, but sometimes life just happens when you least expect it. I've been married to Greg for 5 years, and honestly, things had been fine, or so I thought. We had this routine. Wake up, go to work, come home, cook dinner, watch TV, go to bed. It was comfortable. Maybe a little too comfortable, and I guess I didn't realize at the time, but I started feeling something was missing. Maybe it was the excitement, maybe the spark. You know how it is. You get so used to someone that you forget what it was like when it was new. And then there was Daniel. Daniel and I worked together at a marketing agency in downtown Boston. He's a couple of years younger than me, smart, funny, and honestly, he was just different. He wasn't like Greg, not that Greg's bad, but Daniel had this energy that I didn't realize I was craving. He had this way of making everything seem so exciting. Even when we were just working on a new campaign or discussing clients, it felt like there was always this tension between us, like we were both constantly on the edge of something. It started as just simple banter. He'd send me messages on Slack, joking around about work, telling me how awesome my presentation was, or complimenting me on my style. At first, it didn't even register as anything beyond friendly office talk. But over time, the conversations grew longer, and somehow, the small talk turned into something more. We began talking about our personal lives. He told me about his struggles with his ex, and I talked about Greg, and how we hadn't gone on a vacation in ages, how we had fallen into a routine. It felt good to talk about it, to feel heard. Then, one Friday night, we were out with the team for drinks after work. It wasn't unusual. Greg and I had always been pretty laid back about those things. I'd go out with coworkers, he'd go out with his friends. But that night, it felt different. Maybe it was the way Daniel looked at me, or maybe it was the alcohol, but I felt a shift in the air. By the end of the night, most of the team had left, but Daniel and I stayed behind. We talked, laughed, and shared a few more drinks. It wasn't intentional. Not at first. I wasn't planning anything. But somehow one thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were in his car, heading to a hotel. We didn't talk about it beforehand. It wasn't like some grand affair. It just happened. And in that moment, I didn't think about Greg, or the consequences, or anything really. I just thought about how alive I felt. The excitement, the danger of it all, it was intoxicating. I know what you're probably thinking. I'm a terrible person, right? But you weren't there. You didn't feel it. The way Daniel made me feel like I was seen, like I was special. For once, I didn't feel invisible. Greg had been great, but he wasn't paying attention to me the way Daniel did. He was busy, distracted. And I don't know, maybe I needed that attention more than I realized. That night with Daniel didn't feel like a mistake in the moment. It felt freeing. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel room I'd never expected to be in, with someone I'd never thought I'd be with. I felt both guilty and exhilarated at the same time. I never wanted Greg to find out. I thought it would just be a one-time thing. I'd go back to my life, pretend it never happened. But I couldn't. Daniel and I kept in touch after that, but it wasn't like before. There was always this unspoken thing between us now. We'd share quiet glances at work, small touches when nobody was looking, and it was always so tempting. But I kept telling myself that it wasn't going to go anywhere, that I loved Greg, that I was just going through a phase, or that maybe I just needed a little excitement in my life. I justified it every single time, but that didn't last long. It wasn't just about the physical attraction anymore. I started thinking about Daniel when I was at home, when I was with Greg. I found myself comparing them, which I knew was wrong. But I couldn't help it. It's crazy how quickly you can get caught up in something like this without even realizing what's happening. And then, when I found out I was pregnant, everything changed. I had missed my period, but I didn't think much of it. It wasn't uncommon for me to be late, but then it went on longer than usual, and I started feeling weird, tired, nauseous. So I took a test, and when I saw those 2 lines, I froze. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But there it was. And in that moment, I had to face something I'd been avoiding for months. The truth. I was pregnant. But by who? I didn't know for sure. The timing was all off. I couldn't even figure out how it had happened. It was a mess. It was like everything I had been running from, trying to avoid facing, was now right in front of me, and I didn't know how to handle it. The next few days after I found out I was pregnant were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. Work, home, Greg. I just couldn't stop thinking about what had happened and how to deal with it. I didn't want to tell Greg. I didn't want to admit that I had messed up. I thought about going to a doctor, getting it confirmed, and maybe figuring out what to do next. But every time I looked at Greg, I couldn't bring myself to say the words. I didn't want him to know what I'd done. And I definitely didn't want to think about Daniel. But, of course, I couldn't stop thinking about him either. I wanted to pretend it didn't matter, that it was just a one-off thing, but my mind kept circling back to that night. It wasn't just the sex, it was the whole experience. The way he looked at me, the way he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. That's what had shaken me. I didn't feel that with Greg anymore, and that scared me. I started keeping to myself more. I couldn't look Greg in the eye without feeling guilty. I'd find excuses to not be around him too much. Work was my escape, even though that was where everything had started. I started avoiding Daniel as well. It felt like it would be too easy to fall into something deeper with him if I let myself. But the more I avoided him, the more I missed him. I missed the attention, the way he made me feel seen. Then, there was that night. The night I couldn't avoid it any longer. Greg and I were having dinner at home. It was a quiet evening, just like most evenings had become. He asked me if I was okay. He noticed I was distant, and that's when it all came out. Not the pregnancy, not yet, but everything else. I've been feeling off lately, I said, pushing my food around on my plate, avoiding his gaze. Just stressed, I guess. Is it work? He asked, a little too casually. No, I replied, shaking my head. I think it's just life. Greg looked at me with those familiar eyes, the ones that had once made me feel so loved. But now they felt like they were seeing through me. Do you want to talk about it? You know you can tell me anything. In that moment, I had two choices. I could either tell him the truth or keep it hidden. Part of me wanted to confess everything, the affair, the guilt, the confusion. But the other part of me didn't want to destroy what little was left of our marriage. I chose silence. I'm fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just tired. I think I need a little break. He didn't press me. He never did. He just nodded and went back to his food. But the way he looked at me, the way he didn't push further, it made me feel even worse. I was lying to him, and he knew it. But he wasn't going to confront me. He was giving me space, but I didn't deserve it. I kept up the act for a few weeks, but it wasn't sustainable. I felt like I was falling apart inside, and I was terrified of what might happen if Greg found out. I was also terrified of what might happen if I didn't tell him. I didn't know how to handle this. How do you admit something like this? How do you tell your husband that you've been unfaithful, that you've betrayed him in the worst possible way? I thought about telling him, but I didn't have the courage. I kept telling myself that I would eventually figure it out, that maybe things would just work themselves out somehow. But the reality was I couldn't shake the guilt. And the fear of everything falling apart. Then, one night, Greg was out with some friends, and I was home alone. I don't know why, but I ended up texting Daniel. It was like a moment of weakness. I told him I needed to talk, that I needed to see him. He didn't ask why. He didn't hesitate. He just said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When he showed up, I could barely look him in the eye. The weight of what I had done, of what we had done, was crushing me. I had missed him, yes, but I didn't want to face this reality. I didn't want to face how much I had changed, how much I had let things spiral. We sat down in the living room, and I felt this huge, awkward silence between us. Daniel was the one who finally broke it. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice different than usual, gentler, maybe even more serious. "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." "You don't have to keep pretending," he said, his hand resting on the couch between us, just close enough that I could feel the pull. "I know what happened. We both know what happened. It doesn't have to be this complicated." I shook my head, trying to hold back the tears. It's not just that, I said. I've been lying to Greg. I don't know how to fix this. You can't fix it by running away from it, Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. You need to face it. You need to decide what you want. But that was the thing. I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me wanted to stay with Greg. I loved him, or at least I thought I did. But another part of me didn't want to let go of what Daniel had awakened in me. It wasn't just the sex. It was the way I felt with him. The excitement, the attention, the feeling of being alive. And in that moment, I realized something. I was already lost, and the scariest part was that I didn't know if I wanted to be found. The truth has a funny way of creeping up on you, doesn't it? When it hits hard, and there's no way to hide from it anymore. The worst part was knowing that Greg had started to suspect something. He was quiet, distant, like he knew there was something off but was too afraid to ask. Maybe he was waiting for me to tell him, or maybe he just didn't want to believe it. Either way, the guilt was killing me. It all came to a head one evening when Greg finally broke the silence. He had been unusually quiet all day, and I knew he was getting frustrated with me. I'd been distant, avoiding eye contact, and trying to push him away. So, we sat down for dinner, and he just said it, no preamble, no build-up. Just, I know something's going on. I know you're hiding something from me. I froze. I had no idea how he knew. Was it the late nights at work? The way I'd been avoiding him? Maybe he had seen the way I was looking at my phone too much, the way I would quickly close apps when he walked into the room. But whatever it was, I wasn't ready to face it. Greg? I started, but the words wouldn't come. The truth was choking me, and I didn't know where to begin. You don't have to lie to me, he said quietly. I've known for a while. I just didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to react. I thought I would feel relief, but instead, I felt like I was being crushed by my own guilt. What do you mean? I asked, my voice trembling. I've seen the way you've been acting, he said. You've been different. You don't talk to me like you used to. You're not here. And I'm pretty sure you're seeing someone else. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. It was as though the floor had dropped out from under me, and everything I had been trying to avoid was now crashing into me all at once. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to say the words. But I couldn't lie anymore. I started again, but the words stuck in my throat. Just tell me, Greg said, his voice quieter now. I just need to know the truth. And so I told him. Everything. I told him about Daniel. I told him about the affair. About how it started, how it felt, how I had fallen into it. I told him that I didn't know how to stop, that I didn't know how to deal with the fact that I had betrayed him. It felt like the longest conversation of my life, and the hardest. I watched Greg's face as I spoke, his expression unreadable, but I could see the pain behind his eyes. The hurt. He didn't say much while I was talking. He just listened, which only made me feel worse. I wanted him to yell at me, to get angry, to tell me how much I had hurt him. But he didn't. When I finished, there was a long silence. He didn't look at me at first. He just stared down at the table, his hands clenched into fists. You think I didn't know, he said finally, his voice low, almost as if he was talking to himself. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe we were just going through a rough patch. But this isn't just a rough patch. You betrayed me, and I don't know how to come back from that. I felt like I was sinking. I couldn't speak. There was nothing left to say. I had done this. I had broken his trust, and now there was no way to fix it. Are you pregnant? Greg asked, his voice so quiet that I barely heard him. I nodded, feeling the tears finally starting to slip down my face. I don't know who the father is, I whispered. I don't know how it happened, but I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air between us like a heavy fog. I couldn't even look at him. I could feel his anger rising, but more than that, I could feel his disappointment. And that was the worst part of it all. He deserved so much more than this. He deserved better than what I had given him. I don't know what to do with this, Greg said after a long pause, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how we can fix this. I don't know if I can even look at you the same way again. I sat there, frozen, not knowing what to say, not knowing what I could do to make it better. Part of me wanted to beg for forgiveness, to tell him that I was sorry, that I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But deep down, I knew that wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Greg stood up then, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced for a moment before turning to face me again. "You need to figure out what you want," he said, his voice steady, but with an edge I had never heard before. "Because I can't live like this. I can't keep pretending everything is fine when I know you've been lying to me." "I don't know what I want," I said, the tears falling freely now. "I'm so sorry, Greg. I don't know how to fix this." "You have to fix it for yourself first," he said. "You have to decide what you want before we can even think about fixing this." He didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked out of the room, and for the first time in a long while, I was completely alone. The days that followed felt like a fog, a blur of guilt and confusion. I was living in two worlds. One where I was trying to keep everything together, pretending like things were okay, and the other where I was drowning in my mistakes, in the mess I'd created. I couldn't think straight. Every time I looked at Greg, I saw the hurt in his eyes, the way he was trying to hold it together for the sake of the marriage, but I could feel that the trust was gone. The love was still there, but it was tainted now, and I knew it. I couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. "You have to fix it for yourself first." And I realized he was right. How could I fix anything with Greg if I couldn't even figure out what I wanted? How could I ask him to forgive me if I hadn't forgiven myself? I wasn't just lost because of the affair. I was lost because of what it had uncovered in me. For so long, I'd thought I was happy in my marriage, but now that everything had come crashing down, I saw that I had been too complacent, too comfortable. I had let things slide for too long, letting the spark fade, letting my own desires and needs be ignored. I had let myself drift into a place where I was willing to throw everything away for a brief moment of excitement, a fleeting feeling of being seen and wanted. I spent hours staring at the ultrasound picture, trying to process the reality of it all. I was pregnant, and I had no idea who the father was. Could I even keep this baby? Could I keep living this lie? Or should I tell Greg the truth about everything, about how it had all happened? It felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. Then, a few days after Greg and I had that conversation, Daniel reached out. He'd been quiet for a while, probably giving me space. But now that everything with Greg was out in the open, he didn't hesitate to check in. I could feel the tension in his message, though. It wasn't the usual carefree tone he had used before. "How are you?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I didn't know how to respond. How could I tell him everything I was feeling? How could I tell him that the whole situation had spiraled completely out of control, that I felt like I was sinking and had no idea how to save myself? I couldn't even save my marriage. I ended up writing back, "I don't know what to do anymore. I'm a mess." I wasn't expecting a reply so quickly, but Daniel responded almost immediately, his message short but firm. "You need to make a choice, before it's too late." His words hit me harder than I expected. Make a choice. I already knew what I needed to do. I had known all along. I needed to confront my mistakes. I needed to face Greg and figure out where we went from here. If I wanted to fix anything, it had to start with honesty. It had to start with me choosing the person I wanted to be. But the question remained, did I want to stay with Greg? Did I want to rebuild what we had, even if it was broken? Or had I already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? I sat with those questions for hours. The truth was, I wasn't sure I could ever look at Greg the same way again, not after what I had done. But at the same time, I couldn't just walk away from the life we'd built together. We had so much history, so many memories. I didn't want to throw that all away, but I knew I couldn't lie to him anymore. The next night, I told Greg everything. I confessed that Daniel and I had been in contact after the affair, that I had been struggling with my feelings for him, and that I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. I told him that I felt lost, but that I was finally ready to face the consequences of what I had done. Greg listened, but this time his face was hard, unreadable. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He just nodded, like he had already made up his mind about what he was going to do. And when I was finished, he took a deep breath and said something that I'll never forget. "You have to make a decision too." You can't keep living like this. It was the same thing Daniel had said to me. And in that moment, I realized that I had been running for so long, from my own choices, from the truth, from Greg, from myself. I had been hiding behind excuses, behind the notion that I wasn't ready to face the fallout of what I'd done. But the truth was, I had to decide what I wanted before I could expect anyone else to forgive me. I'm sorry, Greg, I said, the words feeling like rocks in my throat. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I need you to know that I'll do whatever it takes to try and make this right. If you want to leave, I understand. I deserve that. There was another long pause. It felt like forever. But then, Greg stood up and walked toward me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there, looking at me. Then, he took my hands in his. I don't know what the future holds, he said, his voice quiet. But I'm not ready to give up on us yet. But you need to figure out what you want too. Not just for you, but for this baby. For us. The words hit me like a ton of bricks. A baby. A life we had created. How could I keep running from that? How could I run from Greg when he was still here, trying to figure out how to make this work? I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Greg and I could rebuild what we had. I didn't know if Daniel and I could ever have a future. Or if he was just a chapter in my life that I had to close. But I knew one thing for sure: I had to take responsibility for my actions. I had to start rebuilding trust, starting with myself. I'll figure it out, I said, squeezing his hands. I'm going to try. I promise. And for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could start to rebuild. I didn't know how long it would take, or if Greg and I would ever be the same, but at least I was finally ready to face the truth. I was ready to stop running.